40 Watters, welcome to this week's episode, 40 Watt Podcast. I am Philip. I am your host. Going to take care of the housekeeping here really quick so we can get into this episode because I have a feeling this is going to be a long one and I can't wait to take you along for the ride. First of all, going to talk about Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for your support. You help keep this podcast going. You can go over to patreon.com/40 Watt Podcast, support the show, $5 a month, get you free extra episode every time there's an episode uploaded. I appreciate all the support. It literally keeps this train on the rails. You can also subscribe for free over there, and you'll get posts every now and again that I throw out there, questionnaires, polls. I ask your opinions. You can get in touch with me that way really easily. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe and the bell icon. If you are listening on your podcast player, please hit subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you stick around, and thank you to all the returning guests. Going to talk about the sponsors that help to keep this show going as well. First of all, number one, Barry over at Grez Guitars, building some of my favorite guitars ever. I have my Grand Tour number one. If you haven't heard that story, it was me who badgered him to build it eventually. So I have number one, but at Fretboard Summit this past year, he had one made from the tree. And we talked about this on a past episode, the tree. Go look it up. It's the weirdest, wildest story. I admit I was completely out of the loop until Barry built this guitar. Didn't know, had never heard of the tree. And now I'm mildly obsessed with this whole idea. So go check that out. Check out Barry. Check out grezguitars.com. Also sponsoring the podcast, we have Summer School Electronics making some of the raddest pedals. Y'all be looking out in October. Mark over at Summer School always does a October special run. It's usually a unique colorway of something. Actually, y'all have already seen it. It looks rad as hell. You got to go check it out. So it's going to be out really soon. Also, Maris Pedals, thank you for the support. Angelo, Terry, and Gina over at Maris. Some of my favorite people. They make some of the weirdest, wildest, wackiest, most fun effects ever. Or you can be as tame and just beautiful sounding as you ever want them. Mercury X is still my favorite reverb. Probably will be for a long, long time. All right. Under 3 minutes. That might be a new record. This week on the podcast, we have Jonathan Stout, who I met at Fretboard Summit. This year heard for the first time last year at Fretboard Summit. And we were just chatting before we got started, and it was one of those where it's like, okay, we got to stop talking because we got to hit record because some of this is absolute gold. We've already gone down a whole nerd rabbit hole about jazz and swing, and if you're not into jazz guitar, I promise you're still going to enjoy this. So, Jonathan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm fantastic. I'm so delighted to be here, and yeah, dude, this is like a real treat for me to be on this show, and yeah.
In the post Fretboard Summit episode last year, Rhett and I mentioned you and how cool it was to hear what you do, and I've been wanting to get you on the show.
I only played that clip of Rhett and you guys talking to myself like over and over and over again, so I could feel like a good person and like I do have value. I am cool. Yeah, that was a real delightful thing to see pop up on.
And that's a cool thing because I think the music you play and the stuff you're really into and the stuff you're passionate about doesn't get enough credit. And we were talking on before we started recording how I'm a blues guy who loves jazz and sort of wishes he was a jazz guy. Admittedly, I'm a little less of a swing guy like you are, and I'm a little more of a hard bop guy, but we'll get into all those differences here. We'll talk about what really makes them different here in just a little bit. But before we do that, for listeners who may not be aware of what you do, let's start at the beginning. When did you take up guitar? What got you into it? And then did you always just want to be like this swing guy?
Well, like many cishet teenage boys, I was interested in attracting suitable teenage girls. So I picked up guitar in 6th grade. That would have been like 91, 92, like actually 92. And a friend of mine had just moved the radio station on like my analog dial from like the top 40 station with like Belle Biv DeVoe and Digital Underground, and moved it to like what in LA was called pirate radio, and it was like the hair metal station.
Mhm.
So then it was like the last couple days of hair metal. I think for the birthday before that, I the tapes that I wanted and got for my birthday were like Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 and the Metallica Black album. And so that summer I got inspired to want to play guitar. And um and I guess that must have been 92. And a friend of mine had got one at a pawn shop and was like, and he's like, "Hey, look, I can play guitar." I was like, "I want to do that." Um my uncle's a trombone player, my dad's brother, and a professional trombone player, arranger, played with lots of people, did some arranging for the last couple seasons of American Idol before he retired. But he went to Eastman School of Music, so like a real legit pro.
Yeah.
And he told my dad, like, don't buy him a guitar. Rent him a guitar and get him lessons. Because if he's not going to like be into it, don't waste the money. Give him the chance to earn having an instrument. And so that's what we did. I signed up at a local music store, taking a weekly lesson with this guy Mike Schmidt, who to this day, because he's such a great guitar teacher, like that I owe so much to the fact that he's the best beginning guitar teacher anyone could ever have
Oh,
here
that's
in Los
awesome.
Angeles. And we rented a terrible Strat copy from the music store and a 15-watt, solid state amp. And I immediately took to it. I was immediately like, oh, this is the thing that I can hyper focus on. And I found out like at 39 that I'd had the quiet kind of focusy kind of ADHD my whole life. And so it was like, oh yeah, this is the thing I will spend hours and hours in my bedroom working on. And like, a couple months later, it's Christmas time, and my parents decided to get a new radio, like a whole like stereo system for Christmas, and I was like, shit, that means I'm not getting a guitar. And along with it, I got Pearl Jam's 10 and Joe Satriani's The Extremist, and like that summer song to me still to this day like makes me remember what it was like to be like, oh my god, guitar. And obviously all of 10 was really good too. But then but that was like one of those like surprise early Christmas gifts. We can open it early. And then oddly my parents actually got divorced and then got back together years later. So it's just sort of a funny thing. But my dad was always around, but he had to come over on Christmas morning because they weren't together at that time. And when he came over, there was the guitar. And it was like, oh, they totally sucker punched me. I was like, I didn't think I was gonna. And I got a PV Predator and a PV Rage
Yeah.
158 amp.
Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah, that just reminds me of Rhett's. Hey, PV. Yeah, there we go. We got a. Oh.
I'm a PV diehard down here in Mississippi, so that's just who I am.
Yeah. So and that's how I started. And like because I was at this cusp of like the 80s were dying and the grunge thing was just about to take over, I wanted to play some music that was fairly proficient and required a level of virtuosity. But then I also, went down the grunge rabbit hole, like saw Green Day with Offspring opening on the Dookie tour, bought a Misfits Legacy of Brutality shirt technically before I had the tape of the Misfits because I was so punk rock. And then went through a whole goth industrial thing in the mid 90s. And growing up in Los Angeles, our main alternative station, K-Rock, always had this new wave English kind of thing going on because they broke a lot of that stuff way back when. And every lunchtime in the 90s, it was Richard Blade's Flashback Lunch. And so you'd hear Depeche Mode and New Order. And so like when I heard Ministry for the first time and I was like, oh, there's synthesizers and thrash metal guitar, I'm fine with this. This is awesome. Or when I heard electronica break big in the late 90s, I was like primed for that already because I wasn't afraid of synthesizers or drum machines. But I still always loved guitar too. So I kind of did that whole arc. But the funny thing is being goth industrial and like learning the Fade to Black solo and stuff like that never got me the girls to which that I was interested. Did not work, was unsuccessful, and to this point has still remained to be unsuccessful. But in about 1995 or 6, I was in high school, a freshman, and my Spanish teacher, I went to these magnet schools where basically they bus smart kids from all over Los Angeles to one school. And it was a really amazing cohort, but it was some of the nerdiest people on earth, which I'm eternally grateful for because it was my people. Um, but we needed a bit of helping with the social interaction. So the previous year, she'd arranged tango lessons because it was vaguely on the Spanish language cultural tip. But she got sick of tango. So the next year she's like, let's do swing lessons. And so we started taking swing dance lessons as like an extracurricular thing. And that was like just before the Gap ad, just before Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and Royal Crown Review and
Yeah.
Brian Setzer. And standing there in like 10-hole Doc Martens, black jean shorts, and like some kind of goth industrial t-shirt with like greasy hair down to here, split down the middle, that was probably dyed black at that point. I was like, oh, I can go up and talk to girls, and we have this like way to interact socially that's consensual, that I can ask them to dance and it's like okay, and it's not like, it was a really great way to meet people. And um it immediately, I heard that music and it just immediately spoke to me. um and I just wanted to practice swing dancing all the time. um and then as far as the guitar, that got me into jazz very generally. So as much as I was into this new swing dancing thing, I went down the rabbit hole of buying Kinda Blue, buying Giant Steps, buying all the Jazz 101 records. And then I got really into people like Grant Green and Kenny Burrell, who were these great hard bop guitar players, because they had the kind of bebop stuff, but they still had the, oh man, this is out of tune. Anyway, but they had that like stuff like Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell, or,
Yeah.
you know, like Chitlins Con Carne. Like it had the blues and the funk part of it, but it was still jazzy. And
And
I
that gospel
always,
influence also really got me too, that's in hard bop.
absolutely, where you get that with Cannonball Adderley, you get
Yep.
that with Monin, stuff like that. Um,
That was a really
you know,
that was a record that really affected me when I was first getting into jazz, was that Monin record. What a
yeah,
great.
Monin, Mercy, Mercy, Mercy has that too.
I still play that one in blues bands.
Dude, I love that. I mean, the funny thing is, so I had, I don't know whether it was the Blues Brothers or the Commitments or both of which are ironic movies where white people play soul music, but out of great reverence for the black people that made the music. And the fact that they're goofy white people is sort of the joke. They are not actually the saviors of soul. I think we all understand that now. That they're in on the joke, that they're, but it made me really love soul music. And so I remember hearing, you know, all the stuff on the Blues Brothers soundtrack, and then hearing like Shotgun, or like Archie Bell and the Drells, like just hearing like R&B and soul and being like, oh yeah, this has got just so much to it, and loving that. Um, and that was definitely a part of that hard bop stuff that I liked. And so I liked the stuff after hard bop where it kept kind of staying funky, almost like boogaloo.
Yeah.
But I didn't like fusion. I knew that, to me, that sounded like the dentist office growing up. So like smooth jazz, Steely Dan, like that kind of thing. Like, and it's not that it was bad. It was like, that's the sound of the dentist office to me. And I'll never be able to like that because of that association. So like when I hear a band like Wolfpack and they're being funky, the minute they start getting a little bit smooth with the chords, I'm like, nope, okay, too far. I'm like, I love you guys. You guys are so awesome. But no, that's too far.
So because
Yeah.
we're about the same age, I'm going to admit to something for the listeners. I'm sorry for those of you that this really offends. I had that same exact reaction like when I heard Holdsworth for the first time. Like I wanted to like Holdsworth so bad because all of the like cool people liked Holdsworth. I didn't get it. It nails on a chalkboard for me.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many, like Al Di Meola, same kind of thing, where I was like, I know why this is cool. It's not hitting me the way it should.
Yeah.
And it's just that that tonality just to me was the sound of the dentist office, and it's not anything bad about the music, but like, don't yuck people's yums, but also don't yum people's yucks. Like people like what they like. That's okay. But yeah, because I got into jazz very generically, And I always loved Dave Brubeck. That was one of my dad's favorite records. And he was not a musician, but he just liked music. And, he liked all the classic rock stuff that I had studied. I don't know why I thought to be a musician and to be a good musician, you had to be like John Cusack in High Fidelity, but also play. Where you had to be like, well, actually, in 1968, such and such. Well, and then when Jeff Beck finally left the Yardbirds and it was just Jimmy Page, and you had to like know all of those things. Well, this is Deep Purple Mark III, and I thought you had to know all that stuff on top of knowing like, okay, this is this song by the band Sponge from 1994, and then okay, here's this Nine Inch Nails song, and I thought you had to know it all,
Yeah.
and you don't.
No.
You can.
Yeah, I was gonna back when I used to do more gigs than I do now. This was so pretentious. I can't believe I'm going to admit to this. But I used to feel like it was like my job to educate on the songs we were playing. And so I would explain how in Sweet Home Chicago, he says Sweet Home Chicago. He says the land of California. He doesn't mean California, the state. He means the land of milk and honey. Or I'd have to explain that like, oh, yeah, you know this song because you heard the Black Crowes do it, but it's really, is Otis Redding tune, or like, I always felt it was my job to is so pretentious. And I felt like I also needed to know all those things and like
Yeah.
did
Well,
not need to do that.
that is amusingly hard to handle.
Yes.
That's a joke in reference to the song.
Yes.
And I love, man, when that song came out, I watched that. There was like a music video show because we didn't have cable until a little bit later, but there was a music video show on like Saturday mornings on NBC. And I remember seeing like the Black Crowes come out and do Hard to Handle. And I was like, this is my jam.
Yeah.
And it was that Blues Brothers informed thing. But what was funny is like, so I got into Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, I got into jazz. And when I went to college, I ended up getting into USC here in Los Angeles, and I got in as a history major, and I was just going to get a history degree and go to law school, which I did. But that summer I had seen two big jazz shows at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra, who were sort of the house band, and they're, some of the best rhythm section players in the world. John Clayton on bass and Jeff Hamilton on drums, and John's brother Jeff Clayton was the lead alto player. These are some of the best, and they had the most stacked LA band, and then they would back whoever came in. So one year was Dave Brubeck's. That summer, one concert was Dave Brubeck's 80th birthday, and then another one was Guitar Night, and it was John Pizzarelli Trio, Russell Malone, and Mark Whitfield. And I've since met or corresponded with two of those three people. And one of those people that I did talk to, Russell Malone, is no longer with us. So
Yeah.
it really meant a lot. He just sent me a DM out of nowhere and just said, "Hey, I really like your playing." And I remember waking up in bed. I was on my way to a jazz festival in Eureka. And I was at my friend's house in San Francisco, and I just woke up to bed and I just looked at this message. I was like, the guy that played at the first real jazz show I ever saw just said, "Hey, I like your playing." And it was apropos of nothing. I was so deeply touched, and I wrote him back and said exactly that. And unfortunately, he died a couple months later. And I have this cherished memory of this person just being kind for absolutely no reason. And that's, yeah.
I have to tell. So a couple of years ago, so Russell Malone passed last year. For listeners, to let you know, if you weren't aware of Russell Malone, he's been on records you've heard, and I don't mean just jazz records. He played on a lot of stuff that you'd surprise like a straight ahead, like hardcore jazz guy to have appeared on. But my wife and I went to see him. There's a Ridgeland, Mississippi, which is just north of Jackson, Mississippi. They have a jazz guitar festival. It's a 1-day festival, and he was the headliner like 2 years ago, and got to sit there in a tent with like, I don't know, it felt like only 50 other people just sitting there listening to him just absolutely shred his face off. And then to have him gone that quickly after getting to see him, I really cherish having gotten to see him, because he was one of those. I think he's kind of people don't know about him that should know about him.
I would say that's true. And I would also say that he's one of those people that carried the history of the music in him. And so he could be in touch with various things, whether it was like capital B blues
Mm-hmm.
or capital J jazz or all of the shades in between. And all of the church was in him, all of those things. And he had all of that on tap whenever he wanted. And to reach out to somebody like me that plays all this old timey stuff and that he also clearly respected that. And he loved people like Charlie Christian, like that says a lot. And, you know, like we are just saying, you don't really need to know exactly who was in Deep Purple Mark II to be a good guitar player, but like the level of reverence that you have for all of this music and appreciation for it, it just makes you a better musician when you do. And again, it's not, you know, uh, like somebody like Rick Beato does a good job of like pointing out when you go, hey, here's a Nirvana song. Here's something that Kurt did that sounds good. And, he probably got that idea from John Lennon, but he didn't probably think he got it from John Lennon. And it's not like he did a Beato style takedown of, okay, here's this, here's that. Okay, this is a 2 over the 1. Okay, that's why that sounds good. But he just heard these things, and then you regurgitate all of these things in a new way. And then, but when you are grounded in something as harmonically sophisticated as all of the Beatles stuff, it comes through you. And so for somebody like Russell Malone, being steeped in literally all of it really informed his playing in a way that I think, your average jazz school graduate may not have the same depth on. But speaking of jazz school, so I go to USC
Mm-hmm.
and I find out that all the Clayton Hamilton people are on faculty and they have this amazing jazz program, and they actually have a studio jazz guitar department. And I was like, this seems really cool. And they had just come out with this scholarship at orientation. I go to the orientation, the dean of the whole school says, hey, we've got this new scholarship. If you major in 2 completely different things, but that can be sort of tied together, we have a scholarship for that. If you want to be an architect that majors in Spanish also, and you want to design buildings in Bogota, you can do it while speaking the language. If you want to be a, a biotech major, but also get a business degree, then you can run a biotech firm and know the science and the business. And I was like, oh, well, I want to be a history major and I love the 20th century history. And I'm also a jazz musician. I would love to bring those 2 things together because I could write about the history of the music with the rigor of a historian, but with the understanding of actually playing the music.
Right.
And unfortunately, that was not the best fit for me because I was not prepped for a music performance degree.
Yeah.
And
It's grueling. People don't
yeah,
understand how grueling a music performance degree can be.
and also like I was not set up to be a professional musician. There are things you need to do as a professional musician that are not fun. There are gigs you need to play to make a living that you don't want to play. And my whole career kind of that came after this was subsidized by the fact that I had a day job for much of it. And then I was such a unicorn at this thing that I did that I'm not getting called to do like a jazz casual randomly. And so like if I ever find myself on a gig and somebody calls a bossa, I'd like shit my pants. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I haven't had to play a bossa in 15 years. Like, what do I know about that? I can tell you who was on what beginning Benny Goodman recording session in 1937 and what kind of guitar Charlie Christian was playing. And I did all this research on what kind of strings he must have had because they didn't have electric guitar string. Like, I
Yeah.
can nerd out on that. But when you're like, oh, this thing that's just a little bit left of center from what you do, I'm like, no idea. But that jazz guitar department, it was like, no, you need to able to play a smooth jazz groove over a like drum machine beat. You need to be able to put a pedal board together if you get a session call and like, oh, they want a rockabilly thing and then a surf thing, and then you need to have a pedal board that could do all that. And like I grew up reading Carl Verheyen in like Guitar for the Practicing Musician, and like the idea of being a studio guitar player actually seemed really fun, but that's a lot of work, and I don't have time to learn how to be a rockabilly and learn how to be a surf guitar player and so what was funny is it just made me really hate playing guitar. And
Yeah.
to the point where I got a D in a 2-unit class because I didn't know how to learn solos off a record or how to transcribe them.
Mhm.
And so literally I couldn't play this Charlie Christian solo because it was just, I didn't know how to memorize solos quite like that yet. And so for me, who's like the big Charlie Christian guy, I mean, my son's name is literally Charlie for that very reason. And like, like I'm one of the few people who's gotten to play Charlie Christian's guitar that they found. And like they wanted me to play it. Like I got a D in a 2-unit class because I didn't learn a Charlie Christian solo. But what had happened was, as my interest in guitar was like going down, I had started swing dancing really hardcore. And so I was starting to go 7 nights a week. And like one of the guys that I met my first year of college has been world Lindy Hop champion and like is a internationally renowned Lindy Hopper dancer, swing dancer. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what I do. So we would carpool 7 nights a week. And like by the end of that freshman year, I had basically decided to stop playing guitar, period, let alone quit the major.
Wow.
I'd met the woman who was my wife swing dancing, and that's how we met. She didn't even know I played guitar at first. And that's kind of how the story would have gone. But a couple weeks into my summer vacation, I'm at my best friend's house and we grew up playing guitar together. And for whatever reason, we rented this Woody Allen movie, scandal noted. I'm not going to deal with Woody Allen. It's too much to unpack. But
Right.
this Woody Allen movie called Sweet and Lowdown, which is about a fictional, it's sort of a mockumentary almost, of a fictional 1930s Django-style guitar player played by Sean Penn. And Howard Alden did the guitar playing in it. And I was like, wait a second. I listen to swing music all the time, and I play jazz guitar. If I put the chocolate and the peanut butter together, my God. And I remember like we finished the movie and I knew how to play like Freddie Green style rhythm guitar a little bit from playing in big band in high school and like jazz band in high school. And I was like, hey, Chris, my best friend, can you play this rhythm? I want to see if I can. And I started kind of fake Djangoing. And it was so much more authentic than all the bebop I'd been trying to bullshit because since I couldn't transcribe, I couldn't learn people's solos. I couldn't learn the vocabulary. So as much as I could fake bebop, I couldn't really do it. And I didn't really
Yeah.
sound like the genre. And it just set me off on this thing of like, oh, I shouldn't do that. I should do the swing thing. I called my uncle, the trombone player, and I said, hey, do you know anybody that teaches this that I could get a lesson from? And for my birthday, many times he'd got me a lesson with somebody that was doing what I was into. In high school, it was like somebody that did like delays and Cure type, ambient guitar stuff. I said, do you know a swing guitar player? He's like, well, I know this guy that used to play at Disneyland. And it's this guy, John Reynolds, who's this totally unsung hero. Like he's from that like 1960s generation of people that like had the choice to tune in, turn in, and drop out, or to just go backwards in time.
Uh-huh.
He went backwards in time. Like Jerry Garcia went forward, but still liked Django and bluegrass. But like this is one of the people that decided to go back in time. And so he's just been into this 1920s and 30s music since the 60s and is like one of the greatest ever lived to do it. But nobody really knows about him except that they're here in LA. And I went over to his house and he's like a cartoon character come to life. And
My favorite people always are.
Exactly. I walk in and he's watching this Marx Brothers movie that has a famous Lindy Hop swing dancing scene in it. Because he was trying to remember how the song All God's Children Got Rhythm, which they're dancing to in that scene. And I was like, if this isn't a Monkey Meet the Monolith kind of like moment of like swing dancing, guitar, all of it coming together. And so the lesson wasn't a lot of pedagogy. It was just like, yeah, okay, do that. Yeah. I see. Yeah. Well, you're doing that. That's right. Okay. No, here, this is how I do it. And that one lesson like changed my life. And I spent about a year and a half basically learning off the nascent internet and just playing in my bedroom by myself, occasionally playing with other people. And then there was this other swing dancer, my friend Josh Colazzo, and he was a good high school jazz drummer who'd done some college and ended up getting into one of the big bands that we would go see, one of the better ones, and basically became a professional jazz drummer. And all of a sudden, and then he said, hey, I'm going to put a band together. John Reynolds, this guy, my hero, couldn't make the first gig. Could I play it? And it's like, yeah, I can read charts from big band and from jazz band in high school. And I've been studying this stuff. And so I got to play as John's sub for about 6 months of Josh's band. And then about 6 months in, my singer, who her day job has been this whole time running one big swing dance convention a year, she was like, hey, we should start another band. And then we have one more band to dance to that doesn't suck to dance to for our little swing dance community.
Right.
And I just hired Josh because I knew him. And then I hired a bunch of ringers. And me and Hillary were the only amateurs in the band. And that was 23 years ago.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And I just like backed into it. And the crazy thing is, Josh Colazzo is not only like the world's greatest swing drummer, bar none, by like orders of magnitude.
Right.
If there's someone that's a better drummer than him, they don't understand the genre at all. And anybody that understands the genre cannot hold a candle to his musicianship. He's just the best taste, the best ears, the best dynamics, the best listening, but also knows it better than anybody else. And so the funny thing is his day job was he was an Edward Sharp for the whole time.
See, I think it's really interesting. I want to back up to a point you talked about there that I think is really, really relevant, because I've run into this in gigging with drummers when I have to pick up a drummer for a gig, which I don't gig as much as I used to, but running into great drummers who don't understand the blues, or because I'm a blues guy, so most of the gigs I was doing, 90% of the 4 hour worth of music we're playing is straight ahead Chicago, Texas, Delta blues with a smattering of soul music thrown in there, right? For as much as I can fake. And I'd get these great drummers who you've never had to shuffle, have you? you like, or you thought you had because you've listened to Stevie Ray Vaughan, but you've never had to play like a Robert Johnson shuffle because Robert Johnson didn't have drums. So you've never had to interpret how would this get shuffled if there was a drummer. Like, it's amazing when someone is so good at their instrument, but they don't have that frame of reference, and it's a totally different animal.
I'm going to toss out a reference,
Mhm.
and I'm going to see if you get it.
I might not.
Are you hip to Blues Hammer?
I don't think so.
Okay, so there's a movie from the late 90s called Ghost World. It starred
Okay.
Steve Buscemi, Scarlett Johansson, and the other girl that was in American Beauty, whose name I can't remember, with the glasses. Anyway,
Thor
they're
Birch.
like, they're a Borch, nailed it. Okay, so he plays like a nerdy record collector, sort of like in a R. Crumb vein.
Mhm.
And they're just two like Alterna girls that befriend him. And so he takes Thora Birch's character, because they have this awkward, there's a lot of issues with that movie probably now, but they go to see the last living Delta blues man. And of course, it's this, quintessential guy playing just an acoustic guitar by himself. And then he's opening for another band at a sports bar, and they don't even turn the sports off behind him. And then the band that comes out, that's the headliner, is called Blues Hammer. And it's a bunch of Chads in polo shirts. And they start doing like the worst electric blues you could imagine. And they're like, I've been picking cotton all day long. You're like, oh no, this is the worst thing ever. So I've always tried to not be swing hammer,
yeah.
but like that thing of like, you think you know the blues, but it's so much deeper. There's the real thing, and then there's the fake thing. And like, I don't know if you've ever heard this podcast called The History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs.
No.
But
Writing it down
great.
now, though.
Apparently Bob Dylan likes it because
Wow.
Rick Rubin had the host of the podcast on his podcast, and he told this podcast host that Bob Dylan likes his podcast. Imagine being that guy.
Yeah.
Andrew Hickey is the host. But I will say he kind of screws the pooch a little bit on the first episode, which is about flying home, Charlie Christian, Benny Goodman, literally my stuff.
Yeah.
And he kind of reads a little bit too much into some things that I'm like, hey, things were racist, but that's not actually what it was. It was actually this. Other than that, I think it's a fantastic podcast. And the episode on Cream's Crossroads, I'd listened to the first episode. I was kind of like, oh, you didn't quite get it right, because I live in that world. And I think you've kind of overstated a couple things. And I kind of didn't listen to another episode. And then I just randomly ran at a podcast, listened to the Crossroads episode, and they're talking about, it's an hour and a half episode, and they don't talk about Cream till the last half hour, because the first hour is about the history of the blues being a combination of a song form and a tonality, and how that becomes turned into a genre that is a specific genre of music, and the way that somebody like Jimmy Rogers, the father of country music, and Robert Johnson probably had very similar repertoires. But record
Yes.
producers was like, no, you're white, you're a hillbilly. Okay, you're black, you do the blues. And that it started in 1920 with the blues craze, because Crazy Blues, and I can't remember which Smith, but basically, like, if you got a black female vocalist, I can't remember which Smith it was, but it wasn't Bessie Smith.
It wasn't Bessie.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I feel bad because, like, I should know. It's one of them, but and there were several.
Mamie Smith.
Yeah, okay. And
I look things up quickly. It's the thing I do. Drives people crazy.
To get my camera so I can get the guitar and my head in, I have to have the this a little
You're
further
way too far away. I get it.
But yeah, so that blues craze basically made all these record producers go, oh, we got to get black musicians in here to play the blues, because people like that, and people of all ethnicities were buying this thing.
Yes.
And so they started hyper curating what musicians could record. And then there's a feedback loop of people hearing those records and then making music that sounds like those records. And then you get a Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah.
Then you get a Robert, you get a Muddy Waters, you don't get them in 1928.
Yeah, in fact, I think I've talked about it on the podcast, so listeners, bear with me here. But if I haven't, it's really interesting when you talk about someone like Robert Johnson, because where I was in the Delta, there are some folks that really want to legislate what is and is not blues and what flies as a blues musician. And I'm like, yeah, what you it's like they'll call something Delta blues. I'm like, actually, that's Muscle Shoals. Or they'll call something Delta blues, and I'm like, that's Texas. That's, T-Bone Walker. Or they don't actually know the difference in them. Basically, if it's not 12 bars, 1-4-5, maybe they allow a quick change. They really kind of tolerate a 16 bar. But I'm like, y'all are arguing about this like you've never heard Robert Johnson's rendition of Red Hot. You're arguing about what is and isn't blues without realizing, talking to people who heard him, he would play show tunes live. His repertoire included polka tunes. He played whatever the dance hall wanted, even back then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that here's a crazy thing, and this is so, but combine that episode, which was really revelatory for me to really understand, like, okay, the blues is this tradition, and then it gets hyper curated, and then other black musicians start making music sort of influenced by that, and then there's a feedback loop. And on the one hand, it feels gross that these white producers were like hyper curating, but then these people made earnest, authentic music to them based on it. So it's like, I got to remember that there's a little bit of that, oh, that's kind of weird, but also these people made the music they wanted to make.
Right.
And that's a big part of swing, is there's this misunderstanding of swing as this very whitewashed Glenn Miller kind of thing. And it's like, actually, there's all these black artists making this music, and they're not making it to get over. They're making it because that's what they liked too. And for any jazz musician that knows who Lester Young is, Lester Young was like, had the coldest, meanest wit, and he did not suffer anybody, black, white, or whatever. And you think he tried 1 second to make a pop record? No, he was an artist, but his job was being in a dance band. But the thing is, who do you think was in the audience? It was whatever group of people was in the audience. And so there's that whole thing. But I always kind of struggled with the idea that, like, pop music versus art versus commerce, that thing. And, I'm a 90s kid, so the idea of being a sellout, and I'm so I'm an elder millennial, but I have Gen X kind of, headspace. And, I'm like, that's not punk rock. This is punk rock. So I always kind of like had this, odd thing about like art versus commerce. And the reality is, if you go back to the beginning of jazz, I got this from Ted Gioia's book on the history of jazz. And I'd always kind of skip the first couple chapters because I just wanted to get into the 30s and 40s stuff that I really loved. And I always kind of read too quickly through it or didn't really give it its weight. But I was listening to the audio version driving up to a jazz festival. And it talked about how New Orleans was this cesspool of disease because it was on a swamp. And that even at a time in the 1850s and the whole 19th century where people are dying left and right of cholera and, dysentery and the whole Oregon Trail, if you're of that generation, like people died all the time. You had a bunch of kids because a bunch of them weren't going to make it to adulthood or let alone out of their childhood times. But in New Orleans, it was way worse. And
Yeah.
so this memento mori culture of partying, not as a distraction from their troubles, but in full-faced recognition of them. Like, I see you, I'm going to have a good time and have joy anyway, because I know you're around the corner. And, that whole thing, that's central to the beginning of jazz. And obviously there's all this stuff about New Orleans being a Catholic enclave in an otherwise Protestant country, and the fact that they allowed free Black and enslaved peoples to practice their native cultures in places like Congo Square, where other places that was disallowed. You need that stuff too. But the idea that that was allowed to flourish in a place that needed a party all the time. There is a reason that there are second line funerals in New Orleans, because
Yes.
you are not partying to forget or to make light of the tragedy. You are partying because you are recognizing that there is tragedy, and that's okay, because we're going to have joy because we're here now.
I think also when you talk about especially New Orleans, because there is that joy, there's that celebration. It's almost like it's almost celebration in spite of kind of attitude. But also, I think that's why to stereotype it into musical terms, the minor tonality stuff out of New Orleans hits so hard. The dirges are harder. Everything comes, I think, because they also had to grip and come to grips with this very real mortality, darker side of living. And so the sides, the pendulum swings between the two emotions in a place like New Orleans and the music coming out of it hit that much harder. That's why, time period, I don't know exactly, but things like one of my favorite tunes, it's trite at this point, but still, St. James Infirmary.
Yeah.
It's this very interesting, dark tonality song with some humorous elements inside of it. It's the dichotomy of that culture growing up in the 1920s and 1930s New Orleans.
That is, I've never really thought about the minorness part, but that's exactly it. And the thing I'll say is, it's not in spite of hardship. Because I think, because that almost feels, I mean, I've had to really work on that language, because I've just been processing that. And um, like, you don't want to be like Idiocracy, where you just have your TV box so that you don't notice what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's the way that, like, for some of us, we really struggle with what goes on in the world every day. And, there are days where it really hurts to watch the news, because people are being harmed. And you can't look away, especially if you're privileged enough to not have bad stuff be happening to you right now. It would be a dishonor to look away. But you also need to have enough self-care so that you can keep coming back. And so it's like that thing of, like, you have to celebrate that you're here, that you're grateful for what we have, and that, you can be here, but because you need to replenish your soul so you can keep fighting.
Yeah.
Um, we play and the reason that all of this is so in the forefront of my mind, and that I had all that stuff kind of prepped the way I did, is we play this song called Jump for Joy, and it's Duke Ellington, 1941 or 42. It's from this all black review, which wasn't the first all black review, but it was an all black review that was deliberately for the black gaze. And that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And um, they literally depict the death of Uncle Tom. There's a song about Uncle Tom's cabin being just a chicken shack now. Um, it's laden with some stuff, but it was also joyous, and it's called Jump for Joy. And there's a song that's the title track that our orchestra plays with our white vocalist. And if we're going to play this song, we got to like talk about what it means, because it would
Yeah.
be inelegant to do otherwise. And it's about leaving the land of cotton. Cotton Lyle is out of style, honey child, jump for joy. Don't you grieve, little Eve, for the hounds have all been healed. The slave dogs have been healed. And then green pastures, groovy. Green pastures was just a Technicolor movie. And you're like, oh, you got to the north, you got to the west. It's like, oh, shit's still not great. Like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then I'd always kind of like gone past the last stanza about jumping for joy, because it's not my lived experience. I'm not Black, as everyone here can tell. And as much as I have appreciated the culture and tried to learn from it, I don't live in it that same way. And so I would talk about how it was this sort of important message, but wrapped up in a real banger of a dance tune. I mean, like the last 16 bars of that tune swings so hard. It is killer. And you're like, yeah, how did you put that in like the boppiest bop of all time? And yet it's this heavy. But it's because I missed the last stanza, which is about, but we celebrate anyway. And we celebrate because it's what keeps us going. And I had that brought to my attention. Like, I don't think you're getting what it is. And then at the same time, I just heard that Ted Gioia thing about the roots of jazz being about celebration, not in spite of, but in recognition of hardship. And it was like,
Yeah.
and it's made the music so much richer for me, even just in the last year or two, because that's when I heard that. But like, the other crazy thing is, when I started swing dancing, almost all the musicians that I loved had all passed,
Yeah.
but all the people that danced to them, that like, you know how like if you see a movie from the 1980s and there's like a b-boy in it,
Uh-huh.
like if it's early enough, you can tell exactly who that person was, because there weren't 20 b-boys. There was like these guys, and things didn't spread that quick. So like a lot of the dancers were all about between 5 to 15 years younger than the musicians that were making the music. And so those people were, a lot of them were still alive, and you could see them dancing in the movies, and then you could go to a place and see them and meet them. And
Yeah.
so I had this experience of meeting all of these people that actually created this art and created these dances. And it got real personal for me, because I knew them. Like the person that was in this movie, oh, they gave us, they were at our wedding. Oh, this one, they gave us the cake topper to our wedding. Well, I spent, hours with Norma Miller hearing her talk about dancing on stage at the Apollo Theater with Chick Webb, and then her cymbal almost hit, or her foot almost hit the cymbal, and the look he gave her. So it's like, it's real to me.
Yeah.
It's,
You lived it in a way. Like
Yeah.
you got
as
to
much as I
experience-
could have.
Yeah, you got to hear the stories from people who were there firsthand. It's not the same as reading it in a history book or watching a documentary or visiting a museum. See, that's the thing that I try to convey when I talk about blues. Being from Clarksdale, Mississippi, which, don't get me wrong, now it's the culture that's celebrated there in the blues is sort of this melting pot of a lot of different styles that aren't just the Delta blues that came out of that region. But I did get to know, the musicians who made this music. I never got to meet Ike Turner, right? Who's from Clarksdale and controversial figure. Speaking of,
Also scandal noted.
scandal noted. But I have gotten to play with his son. Like I've gotten to play a gig with Ike Turner Jr., playing piano. I never got to meet, uh, oddly enough, Conway Twitty's also from Clarksdale adjacent. He's from Friars Point. Never got to meet him, but I did play. He showed up at a blues jam one night, so I played for him one night, but I got to hang out with Honey Boy Edwards, who was Robert Johnson's stepfather. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I try to convey, is that being in a place or being around the people who made it, even if maybe not that first wave, but the people that got to experience that circle at the time of and hearing their stories and hearing what really went into it in that day. There's a really great biography that I've mentioned on this podcast before, Honey Boy's biography, called The World Don't Owe Me Nothing. and he tells the stories of going north, going to Chicago. And it's really great to hear because I've gotten to hear, sit and chat with him before he passed. And so it's autobiographical. He had some writers who helped him do it. He just sat down, told stories, they recorded it, then they put it in chronological order, right? And made it all make sense as a story, as a narrative. But I got to hear it in his voice because I know his voice, and he talks about these musicians that they traveled, and the movies like to paint even the modern Sinners, which is a new movie that came out recently, centered in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Didn't film it there though, did you? Sorry, I'm still a little salty about that. They filmed in Louisiana and Georgia instead of Mississippi. But we get this image of the painted this archetypical field worker who plays guitar, who does it also at night in the juke clubs before going to church on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
You read that biography and you're like, no, when you were a musician, that was your life. You lived, and you were also a hustler. You gambled to make a living some nights. Like, you were just doing what you could to get to the next town, this idea of the person works the field all week and then on the weekend existed, but that was not the life most of the musicians that made this music live.
Well, when we get past the cartoon character,
Yeah.
and like, you don't have to be into this music, but it's like, if you really love like British invasion, early psychedelic stuff, if you think it's actually Austin Powers, you've misunderstood it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the cartoon character. And like, sure, there's an element of there's something there that is true in sort of a sense, you know what I mean? But it's not accurate.
No.
And
the
so
nuance is gone. You've lost all the nuance.
Well, the
you're
nuance
bullet
and the
points.
depth.
Yeah.
Well, and so for me, like, I came in as a swing dancer who, there was this great disconnect between people that played for swing dancers, many of whom were just straight ahead capital J jazz musicians that don't really care about the era. And even the ones that did had been so divorced from serving a dance floor in the tradition that jazz was literally in service of a good time. And that the idea that you would change what you did artistically to make a dance floor happy was verboten. And obviously the trick is that your art shouldn't have to change that much to please a dance floor. It really shouldn't be that much work. And if it really does have to change that much, it's like, then you shouldn't be doing this music. Turn the gig down. But what musician turns a gig down, whether they're right for it or not? But
yeah,
Papa gotta eat.
Yeah, exactly.
But basically, like, I was somebody that had DJ'd in swing dance circles because most events can't afford a live band most of the time. And I would just created a band that would play a live version of my DJ set, essentially. I would play Benny Goodman Sextet with Charlie Christian tunes. I would play small group versions of songs that I would DJ. And my template was these songs that I would DJ. So I would have them be the same length with the solos in the same order. And it kind of brings me back to this thing that we talked about briefly off topic, but like, when you're in a rock band, when you're a kid growing up as a rock player and you cover a tune, you play the same number of verses, you play the same number of choruses, you play the riff the way they play it, or as close as you can get. Maybe you play the solo off the record if you can figure it out. But like, you're not doing a reinterpretive cover. You are not going from Bob Dylan's the Hendrix tune,
All Along the
All Along the
Watchtower.
Yeah. You're not approaching a Bob Dylan tune and going to turn it into a Jimi Hendrix tune that way. Your job is to learn the Jimi Hendrix version or to learn the Bob Dylan version. If you're going to play Enter Sandman, you don't have a reinterpretive reimagining of Enter Sandman. You learn how to play Enter Sandman. And in jazz, people just hand you a real book and go, okay, you play all blues. It's like, can we just play the Miles Davis version perfectly? And then, like, especially in earlier forms of jazz, it is more structured like a pop tune because people had to dance to this, and you run out of moves after 3 minutes, and you got to think, like, in 1939, 1938, it wasn't a room full of b-boys. It was a room full of people that were squares on dates. And then the people inventing Lindy Hop and really the real jitterbugs were over in the corner inventing it. They hadn't filled the whole floor with people that were that good yet. So like you had a bunch of squares on dates. You had to keep those people happy. They were just looking for love in all the right places.
Yeah.
And so like, you had to like get to the point. So they're structured more like a 3-minute pop tune. And, because the recording medium of that day was the 78 RPM record, tunes would sometimes be truncated to fit on the record. So it's not that every song was exactly that, but that's what people's, attention spans were. And so when you learn to play Take the A Train in jazz school, you don't play the Duke Ellington arrangement or the Billy Strayhorn arrangement of Take the A Train. You learn to just play the melody and the chords and you do your own thing with it. And, the thing is, you don't know what you're doing yet. Your version doesn't have any value. So for me, like copying sort of the arrangements, even if I was taking my own solo, the fact that I would take 16 bars on an electric and then the next thing would happen to be a piano solo, and that meant the dynamics came down, and then the next thing would be a trumpet solo, the dynamics would come up, and the fact that like I already wrote on the chart who goes when means the drummer is not just reacting after the fact, he's reacting and telegraphing what's coming next. And that's a big distinction between like swing music and like later kinds of jazz.
Yeah.
Because like if you've ever been on a jazz gig and there's this big long pause after the last soloist finishes before the next one starts, where they're waiting for the applause, whether it's there or not, that's dead air in this context. So I kind of used that as a template and just kind of recreated my DJ set as a band. And it immediately was successful in our little scene because it didn't suck to dance to. And
because you realize that as a performer, you're a servant to this other art. It's not, hey, look at me and what I can do. You're there to support an other artist that's doing a thing and creating something.
And that I can still make art while having job number one being rock a party.
Yeah.
And there's a great documentary called Scratch that came out in like the late or early 2000s. Mm-hmm. I remember it, like I got it on DVD. Remember those? Anyway, hold on. There's a cloud I got to yell at. But I got it on DVD, and it's about the history of like turntablism. And one of the dichotomies that it makes in this documentary is the difference between somebody with a super deep crate of records that knows how to rock a party and pick the perfect record versus somebody that's like a battle scratcher that has one record to play while they're scratching over top of it. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be the guy that's just scratching for my own devices. If I want to scratch and stuff, I still want to be able to like pick a good tune and be like, oh, okay, that's the next one. Okay. And then bring it up, break it down, like kind of give this flow. And so like, so much of the way that I think about dynamics and arranging, I have this like rock lens on where I'm still trying to do it authentically to that era. But the way I understand is I'll never forget reading in 1994 in Guitar Player magazine, Trent Reznor talking about how if you're screaming and then you want to take it up a level, you can't just scream one louder. You have to scream and then whisper and then you scream again. And that's, it's so much louder. Those kind of dynamic shifts are such a big part of those big band arrangements or even small band swing arrangements. And like that was so formative for me, and realizing like, there's so many lessons in disco or house music that it's just the same thing with a different accent.
Yeah.
You go, when Artie Shaw goes like a big long gliss, you're like, that's a riser. It's the same thing. And so like, whether it's my history of learning how to play rock guitar or hearing just all the rest of the music of the 20th century, I started to understand the context of this music. And it took me about 15 years to realize what I was doing in creating this hyper specific music that was what I thought was authentic swing music, but it was through the lens of playing for swing dancers, was actually an entirely postmodern invention, because that audience of just swing dancers didn't even exist in the 30s because it was regular people mixed in.
Yeah, they were still figuring it out at that point. Exactly. The art of swing dancing was still in its very formative stage.
Exactly. And so you didn't have a room full of people that just all only did swing dancing and asked each other to dance the whole time. And so, like, what I'd actually done was try to be authentic to the era while filtering it through this lens that was specific. And you start to go, oh, what even is authentic? And I'll see something like, because I think a lot about like food is such a great metaphor. When I see a show like Mind of a Chef, or no, Ugly Delicious on Netflix with David Chang, and he talks about like, you know, what even is authentic? Because if you're like, oh, I make authentic Thai food, it's like, what part of Thailand?
Yep.
Okay, well, my Thai friend's mom makes it differently because she's from this other part. And then, like, I'll never forget, we have this thing in LA that's now actually all over the country called Din Tai Fung. And it's the Shanghainese soup dumplings called Xiaolong Bao, which is like a little pork dumpling and there's soup inside and it's
Yeah.
gelatinized. It's like cold and they put it in. Then when you eat it, it pops and it's like
And they're
amazing.
delicious. They're absolutely freaking
Yeah.
delicious.
Well, that restaurant, they only had one American outpost and it was here in Los Angeles for many years. And we would go and think we were so cool. And then now they've expanded all over. But that's a Taiwanese restaurant that was people that fled Shanghai and the China, like, okay, so they're doing their version of the Shanghainese dumpling, but they go back to Shanghai and they try the original and it looks like a softball. And you're like, oh, you created this whole new thing that's actually really cool and maybe even better. But like you start to go, well, what even is authentic? Because, you know, sometimes the inauthenticity is what's cool. It's like all of rock music comes from somebody turning the previous version of rock music up a little bit louder and playing it a little bit faster. And so there's beauty in the changing it, but then there's also beauty in being like, I'm aware of what I'm doing. I'm not just doing it because I don't know any.
But and the idea of authenticity is a really fun conversation to have, and it can be challenging for people to be willing to open their mind to what is authentic. Because I mentioned it in a few episodes back, and I've talked about it. I'm Lebanese. My mom is Lebanese, was Lebanese, and I'm half Lebanese, if we want to call it that. But that's the culture I grew up in, and so I grew up eating Lebanese and Mediterranean food my entire life. But the food I eat has been adapted to the available resources in the Mississippi Delta through, the 1980s when I was born and grew up,
I'm
but
sure. I'm
also
sure they had
for
a lot of. I'm sure they had a lot of sumac in in the
right.
grocery store.
We didn't have that. We couldn't get tahini half the time. You know what I mean? If we needed it. So things had to be adapted. There's not exactly a lot of sheep and lamb in the Mississippi Delta. So restaurants and my mom adapted recipes for super lean beef instead of lamb. And so it's this very different thing. And some people would look at it and go that that's inauthentic, but it's not, because authenticity doesn't stop. What people like to call authentic is usually a snapshot of a moment in time and how things were on March 11th of 1947 in this very specific 30-mile radius of this place. That's authentic. They want to claim that as authenticity for time immemorial. So when people talk about the things of the authenticity of the blues or the authenticity of jazz, it's in the same vein, as you're relating it to food. Sure, that's authentic to Holly Springs, Mississippi in the 1940s for this type of hill country blues. But just because this person plays that music in this style, they brought in these elements, doesn't make them an inauthentic hill country blues musician. It's just the evolution of the authenticity of that music played with the right spirit and heart and reverence for the music that came before. That's still authentic.
And it's funny because both of us are obviously deeply committed to preserving traditions that are at risk of getting lost.
Yeah.
And there's a tension between preserving a tradition in amber and then preserving it so that it's alive and breathing. But, sometimes the goal is, if you want to keep the tradition alive, you got to contribute to it, you got to add to it. But then some people will come along and change it. And that's great as long as they realize they're going somewhere else.
Yes, they're
Because the
taking it
problem
somewhere.
and as long as they don't think that they're taking it somewhere and that it's still the same. It's like, no, if you're gonna bend it that far, you're now in a new thing, and don't put yourself out there as doing this thing.
Yeah.
Recognize if you're a capital J straight ahead jazz musician, don't play swing dances like that it's so much better the way they did it in 1955 versus the way they did it in 1949 or 1949 would not be the good example, 1939 or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like for me, I've always lived in the tension between those two things of like, I want to keep the thing that is special about this music and honor it. But I also now recognize the limitation of authenticity, and that like I want to be true to it, but sometimes like the way fiction can be true while being made up. It's like I'm trying to honor that thing. And so obviously having a connection to the legacies of those people is really important, but also being steeped in the tradition. And then when I make art based on it, I'm doing it thoughtfully and knowledgeably, hopefully,
Yeah.
and that's a huge part of what I do. So like I started the swing dance band because bands sucked to dance to for the longest time. And then when I started playing guitar, it was like, oh, I want to find the kinds of guitar playing that they did. And so I got really into just playing 4-beat rhythm guitar. And so I studied Freddie Green, but I also studied all the other cats that did it. And it's impossible to hear sometimes on the records because there's buried. But then you would just start to feel it after a point, and you could extrapolate. And then I got into Charlie Christian because not only did he basically invent electric guitar playing the way we think of it, he popularized it, and everybody from T-Bone Walker to B.B. King to Chuck Berry would give it up to Charlie. But like he had a specific way of doing it. And then he also wrote a bunch of tunes and arranged a bunch of tunes and didn't necessarily get credit for that. So I like preserving that part of his talent too, and playing it like with the same number of choruses, where we play this riff, we play without chorus, we play with the right harmonies, the right riffs. And then like I went down this whole rabbit hole of chord melody guitar playing, which if anybody knows who I am before this podcast started, it's probably from Instagram, and it's probably from playing that kind of stuff. And that was a whole another journey because I mentioned I never knew how to transcribe. I could never pull the stuff off the record. And I was lucky there was this one guy, Gary Hansen, who'd put up this Charlie Christian website, and I basically devoured it. And he pointed out how like Charlie used everything with shapes, so that like you could basically learn a lick on one tune and you could use it on another tune. You just move it into the new key, and you're like, oh, okay. And so I had kind of extrapolated the matrix code of that language from his transcriptions, and occasionally doing one of my own, but those weren't that much of a stretch because I already knew it. But when I would hear somebody like this guy, Alan Roos, who's one of my other heroes, Alan was another guitar player that played with Benny Goodman. He actually played with Benny Goodman at his big peak, and he left the band. And then 2 years later, Charlie Christian came along. And so they didn't overlap. But as late as 1944, Alan Roos was winning like the downbeat poll for best guitar player. So he was an important cat. And if you asked Freddie Green, as I heard this interview in the 70s with Freddie Green, there were only two people he listed as influences: John Trueheart and Chick Webb's band, and then Alan Roos with Benny Goodman.
Wow.
And
okay.
So like if the guy who was the Kleenex, the Xerox of swing rhythm guitar gives it up to Alan Roos, Alan Roos was a killing swing rhythm guitar player, and he was. And I really try to like have his feel. But he was a student of George Van Epps, who most people just know as like the 7-string inventor.
Right.
And when he played later in his career, he would play electric, and he'd play fingerstyle, and he would play what he called lap piano, where he's kind of playing the bottom and the top at the same time, all chord melody. But when you finger pick, you can skip strings. When you're Chet Atkins, you can skip strings. But when you're got to pick, you got to only have notes that are ringing. And so he actually had this whole other style, and he taught it to his student, Alan Roos, and many other people played similarly. But I think Van Epps, and then especially Roos, kind of took it to this other level where like a guy like John Trueheart played. And that's cool. That's like play a triad, hammer on your pinky, play a triad, hammer on your pinky, but it's not really swinging like single notes can swing. And Alan Roos was a guy who was like, where like he had the blues single note singingness because he was sliding in and up and out of things, that it just swung so much harder. And so there's literally nothing about Alan Roos out there except about how he was the greatest rhythm guitar player that nobody ever talks about, and how everybody misses him when he leaves the Goodman Band. And he went on to play with a bunch of other people. And like he's on a bunch of early Sinatra records. If you ever go to Disneyland, he's on Grim Grinning Ghosts because he went into the studios after the big band era. But his style of chord melody playing was one that I did an impression of for like a decade, but I could never actually do it for real. And the pandemic hit, and I had basically come up with my whole own language of playing chord melody. And fun thing, I didn't learn this until I really broke down Alan Roos. I was doing a lot of solo guitar. And the thing is, a chord solo in a band is not the same thing as playing solo guitar.
Right.
Because when you're playing a solo, you might have more than one note, but you don't have to carry all the harmonic weight, all the information. When you play solo guitar, if you don't play that seventh, you have to hope people's ears are implying the seventh.
You got to hope they at least have a little bit of reference for the vocabulary that it's filling in the gaps.
Exactly. But when you don't when you have a lot more freedom, when you don't have to lay it out, like I'm friends with Nathaniel Murphy, Zeppelin Barnatra works at CME, and he's just this amazing solo guitar player where he'll render Kashmir by Zeppelin on a guitar with a B bender. And it's like even though we don't do the same thing, we still do the same thing because we have that recognition of like, how do I carry all the harmonic weight and get the melody and get all the parts? But then like you have to finger it here because then you got to hit that. It's like a puzzle. And but playing solo guitar is actually different than what somebody like Alan Roos really did. And so a lot of the published things that you can find are solo guitar pieces, but they're not improvisations. And the pandemic hit. I got on some medication for my ADHD that I found out I had. And I'd always given up when I got to a certain point of trying to transcribe because it was just too hard. And the medication just helped me fight a little bit harder, a little bit longer. And I also found out about this thing, SoundSlice. And SoundSlice is a lesson platform, soundslice.com. It's just a website. And it doesn't do the work for you, but like it's a place where you go buy lessons and people or share lessons. And it's a video and synced notation. So it's like follow the bouncing ball with the tab or whatever underneath. But what was profound about it is that it's got the web editor for the notation built into the web app. So like it combines a slowdowner with a notation editor, and having those two not just on the same frame, but synced was this game changer for me, because maybe I got the first note, but then I wouldn't be able to know what the second note is. And by the time I got to the third note, I forgot the first note. So I figured out that I'd had to write it down. And then I figured out that if I put it into Finale, because I would write sheet music for my band and do arranging for my band, I knew that if I was figuring out a Charlie Christian solo, I could put it into the Finale, have it play it back, and then I could check my work. But that's that program. And then I've got Audacity over here to play the waveform slower. And I've got I've got all these different things. Now this was all in the same place. And I could go from playing the audio sample to then immediately clicking a button, have it play the synthesizer of what I'd put in as notation and go, oh, I got it right.
Okay.
And all of a sudden I started working on this Van Epps tune. My friend Tommy Harkenreiter is a great blues guitar player. He's actually going to be doing a jump blues camp in Oklahoma City next spring. And he's just about to announce it. And it's great because that's the home of Charlie Christian and T-Bone Walker and all that stuff. And I'm going to be teaching at it. But Tommy was working on this Van Epps thing, and I just suddenly cracked it. And I was like, son of a, my God. And then the next thing, and I actually reached out to Howard Alden, the guy who started all this, because he played guitar in that movie. And I've told him how life-changing that was and that it's all his fault from here on out. And he appreciated that.
That's awesome.
But he actually spent a lot of years playing with George Van Epps. And I knew he would know. And I said, hey, could you take a look at my transcription and tell me if I'm in the ballpark? There's a couple things that are pretty specific and I think you would know. And he said, I haven't thought about that song in 30 years, but I think what might be easier is here's my transcription that I did 30 years ago.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was able to check my work. And there's a couple things like you can play this lick. You can play it in that position, but you can also play it. And I realized it's a lot of kind of something that's shaped like a 4 chord to something that's shaped like a 5 chord.
Yeah.
Instead of a 2 shape, it's a 5. It's okay. And that's a whole math thing that
No,
bake your noodle.
We won't make our listeners figure out all the listening thing, but
I got it. And it killed it. It was crazy to go from doing an impression that was based on incorrect transcriptions and partial things to then I learned this Van Epps thing. Howard said I got part of it right. He corrected the thing that I got wrong about which position some of those things were in. And then I open up this Alan Roos solo, and it's just 8 bars. And it's on this song from 1945 called Stuffy by Coleman Hawkins. My band, the Campus 5, has been playing Stuffy since we started in 2002. It's on our first record. And I do like my version of a chord solo when I first started on it. And then to open up Sound Slice and start chipping away at it and get it. And it's bonkers. And just for everybody's reference, it sounds like this. I mean, it's bonkers. Yeah. And like, because of Sound Slice and using that as a tool to transcribe, it doesn't tell you what the notes are.
Right.
But being able to slow it down and have the notation sync. And then if I was trying to figure out whether something landed on beat 1 or the and of 4, I could just circle beat 1. And if I didn't hear it, I'd be like, okay, well, it must be on the and of 4.
Yeah.
And just like loop it. All those things, all of a sudden it cracked it.
So handy. So it's also really, really heartening to hear someone else who is not great or was not great at transcription, because it's always been a flaw of mine. I've done transcribe software, which is it slows it down and even starts to give you tonic centers. It starts to identify chords for you, because sometimes in recordings, like you said, like with Freddie Green, sometimes it's buried so deep you've got to just kind of hear it and feel it and figure it out. You got to extrapolate a little bit. I'm not familiar with Sound Slice, so now I'm going to go and like take a lot of the solos and stuff I've been wanting to learn that I've just struggled to hear or to transcribe properly, because using the multiple different platforms, Guitar Pro for transcriptions, to transcribe to slow it down, or Audacity, which I used to try to do that, and did learn a lot of solos that way, but also probably took some years off my life in the frustration of figuring it out.
I'll tell you one other thing about Sound Slice that's so amazing. Transcribing it, i.e. figuring out the notes that are played. And I don't think people should shit on tab necessarily, because the positions are actually really important for some of this stuff. And so we have to have tab to respect that, because reading notational information or positional information on standard notation is too hard. It's stupid. It doesn't make sense. But figuring out the notes that Alan Roos played on that solo, that was just step 1. Step 2 was getting it under my fingers and shedding it. And so the thing that Sound Slice is so good at is being able to shed the thing at 60%, now 70%, now 80%, now 90%. And one of my friends and heroes, Matt Munisteri, is like, oh, if you can't play at 125%, you don't really know it. And I was like, well, I don't go that far sometimes. And then the thing is, like, so I basically transcribed every Alan Roos solo I could find. And one of the reasons he's so obscure of a figure is he was a sideman. It's like that 40 Feet from Stardom thing where he's just on a million different records. And so he's not credited easily in a way that's searchable so often. So to find the times that he would get an 8-bar solo here or something like that. And think about this. I was talking to Jude Gold from the new No Guitar is Safe podcast, which again blows my mind that I'm here with you, blows my mind that I got to talk to him. It was like, it's just been crazy lately. But we talked about the fact that, oh man, my brain just went completely out the window. we're talking about Shedding, Matt Monastery.
Roos.
Anyway, I had a thought. I didn't mean to name drop that podcast,
It's
but
okay. Talking about sidemen who don't always get
oh,
credited. Yeah.
right. So like he's just on all these records. You can't easily find things under his name. And so that's what I was going to talk about. If you were an acoustic guitar player in a big band, do you know how hard it was to record you being able to take a solo? You'd have to be right up against the microphone where the band is all behind you. So it was already this hugely artificial thing to get a guitar player to get to have a solo in a big band.
Right.
So like they didn't have that many. So to find, like, Alan Roos probably played over 100 songs with Benny Goodman on records at least, and he only got 3 solos, and like 2 of them were 8 bars at a time. So like to find all of his work, I've obviously found a bunch of it, and I've transcribed almost all of it. But like I will forget them, and then when I go back to them later, I can relearn them using SoundSlice because I have this archive of material. And it's funny, there's another guy that's an Alan Roos nerd that's in his 80s, or maybe late 70s, early 80s, and we became friends online. And he'd sent me stuff that he had collected. And when I finally cracked it, I sent him the link, and he was like, "Oh, that's really cool. Could you just send me a PDF?" And I was like, "No, you don't understand the gift I'm giving you of this thing that you can play along with." And everybody's learning modality is different, so I don't begrudge anybody, but I really think that there's something special about the way that you can learn from the video and have the notation there. It's kind of mind blowing. But like the crazy thing is I managed to kind of learn the matrix code by learning enough of his solos that I was sort of like able to kind of figure out what he does and then start running with it. And then here I am talking to you. Like, it's an amazing thing.
And like so many guitarists, we forget that all of these mind-blowing guitarists that we've looked up to and we've learned, they had their bag of tricks. So once you unlock, this is how he does this type of thing, suddenly you've unlocked X% of their entire repertoire because this is their move. This is a common thing they do. Now, most of them have, more to choose from. I have my 3. And that's being very generous. I have my 3 that I probably stole every single one of them from Freddie, BB, or Albert. But I'm going to check that out. I think that's a really useful resource. I'm going to link it down in the description below, or at least I'm going to try to remember when I get around to writing this description. But I think we're going to pause there. We're going to take this over to Patreon because we have yet to even talk about the guitars you play, and you play some really, really rad guitars. Normally our Patreon episode is audio only, but we might have to do a special video one so that Patreon supporters can see these guitars. So we're going to pause here. Listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you for hanging out and checking this out. If it's your first time, again, thank you for checking this out. I hope you come back. Every episode's a little different because every guest is different. And this has been a particular joy for me because I love talking about this stuff and I don't get to talk about it very often and get to the level of the passion of talking about a very specific type of music or a very specific type of playing. And for those of you that are here all the time, thank you for hanging out. Go over to patreon.com, 40 Watt Podcast. You can get all the bonus episodes. We're going to head over there now. All the links for Jonathan's website, Instagram, all that stuff's down below. Be sure to click and check it out, subscribe, follow, whatever it is you need to do here on the internet. I can't keep track of all the things that you got to do. There's too many. There's new ones all the time. So, Jonathan, thanks for coming on.
Dude, what an honor, and I mean, the conversation that we got to have with your understanding of the blues tradition, man, I couldn't, it's so deeply meaningful to me. So thank you so much, dude.
It means a ton to me to have you on because after discovering you last year, you're one of those players that I'm like, in a different life, that's the player I wanted to be. That really is. So we're going to go over to Patreon. Listeners, be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.